that conversation we had about wanting to better understand money supply?
Yeah,
Well, I think this is going to be a fascinating deep dive. I mean, we hear it all the time, right?
absolutely.
Central banks, interest rates, inflation.
All the time.
But how does it all actually work?
Yeah, how does
What even is money supply?
it's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's more relevant than ever, I think, especially with everything that's happening in the economy right now.
Right.
In the simplest terms, money supply is the total amount of money available in an economy
Okay.
at any given time.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than just like the cash in your wallet or the numbers in your bank account.
So it's not just about governments like printing more money?
Not at all.
Okay.
Think about it. Like this money supply is like the fuel that keeps an economy running.
Okay.
Too little and things stall out.
Right.
Too much and you risk overheating, and that's where inflation comes in.
So how do we figure out how much fuel is in the tank?
Well, we've got this document theories of money supply to guide us.
Yeah.
And one of the first things it highlights is that there are three key players
Okay.
that determine the money supply.
Or
Central banks,
okay.
commercial banks,
Got it.
and the non-bank public,
Which is us.
which is us, exactly.
Okay.
So,
Interesting. So it's not just some all-powerful wizard in a central bank,
Yeah.
controlling everything.
not quite.
Okay.
It's more like a game
Okay.
with multiple players, each with their own moves.
Right.
The central bank is definitely a powerful player,
Right.
but they're not the only one.
Okay, so let's break down these players then.
Yeah.
First up, central banks.
Right.
What's their role?
Central banks are like the referees of the money game.
Okay.
They set the rules, they control certain levers, and they try to keep things stable.
Okay.
One of their key tools is something called high-powered money.
High-powered money. That sounds intense.
It is.
Okay.
Think of it as like the foundation of the entire money supply. It's the physical currency issued by the central bank,
Okay.
plus the reserves held by commercial banks.
Reserves, is that like their emergency stash?
Exactly.
Okay.
Banks are required to hold a certain percentage of their deposits in reserve,
Right.
kind of like a safety net.
Okay.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
High-powered money is called that because it has a multiplier effect.
A multiplier effect. What does that mean? It like magically multiplies?
Not magic, but pretty close.
Okay.
It's all thanks to the way that commercial banks operate.
All right, so let's bring in player number 2 then.
All right.
Commercial banks.
Yeah.
What's their role in all of this?
Commercial banks are the ones who really get the money moving.
Okay.
They
Yeah.
do this through a process called fractional reserve banking.
Fractional reserve banking. That sounds complicated.
It's actually a pretty simple concept.
Okay.
Let's say you deposit $100 in your bank.
Okay.
The bank is required to keep a fraction of that,
Okay.
maybe $10 in reserve.
Okay.
But they can lend out the remaining $90 to someone else.
So my $100 is just sitting there and someone else is walking around with $90 of it?
Not exactly.
Okay.
That $90 that they borrowed
Yeah.
was likely deposited into another bank,
Okay.
which can then lend out a portion of that deposit,
Right.
and so on and so on.
Right.
This creates like a chain reaction where the initial $100 deposit ends up expanding the money supply by much more than the original amount.
Okay.
That's the multiplier effect in action.
So money is literally being created out of thin air.
In a sense, yes.
Wow.
It's not about printing more bills.
right.
It's about the way that banks leverage existing money to create new loans and deposits.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
Good.
So we've got high-powered money from the central bank,
Right.
and then commercial banks multiply that through lending.
Exactly.
Where does the non-bank public, us regular folks,
Yes.
fit into all of this?
Well, we may not have fancy titles
Yeah.
like central banker, but our decisions play a huge role too.
Oh.
The amount of cash we hold versus keep in our bank accounts, our
Yeah.
investment choices,
Mm-hmm.
even our spending habits, all of that impacts the money multiplier
Wow.
and the overall money supply.
So just by me deciding to keep more cash on hand or
Yeah.
finally opening that savings account, I'm actually influencing money supply.
That's absolutely.
Whoa.
Our collective choices about how we hold and use our money impact how effectively banks can create new money.
Really?
If everyone suddenly decided to hoard cash under their mattresses,
Right.
the money multiplier would plummet.
This is really making me rethink how I see my everyday financial decisions.
Yeah.
This hidden power we all have.
Exactly. And that's what makes understanding money supply so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just some like abstract economic theory. It's something that directly impacts all of our lives.
Yeah. I'm already feeling more empowered. knowing that I'm not just a passive observer in this system.
Right.
But before we get too far ahead, let's break down some of the key concepts a bit further.
Sure.
This document mentions something about M1 and M2.
Yeah.
What are those?
Those are basically categories that economists use to measure and track the different forms of money in an economy.
Got it.
Think of it as classifying money based on like how easily it can be spent.
Okay, so like cash versus money in a retirement account.
Exactly, you got it.
Okay.
M1 represents the most liquid forms of money,
Okay.
the stuff you can use immediately.
Right.
This includes cash and checking accounts.
Got it.
It's the money that you use for your like everyday transactions, like, that morning coffee or your groceries.
Makes sense. So what about M2 then? Where does that fit in?
M2 is a broader category.
Okay.
It includes everything in M1,
Okay.
but it also adds in things like savings accounts,
Okay.
money market accounts, and time deposits.
Got it.
These are funds that are a bit less accessible,
Okay.
but still considered part of the overall money supply.
So M1 is like the cash in your pocket.
Yeah,
And M2 is like your emergency fund you keep in the bank.
that's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
And knowing the difference between these categories helps economists, analyze economic trends.
Okay.
So, for example, if they see a rapid increase in M1,
Yeah.
it could be a sign that inflation is on the horizon.
Okay, this is all starting to come together. We've got central banks setting the stage with high-powered money,
Right.
commercial banks multiplying that through lending,
Exactly.
and then all of us, the non-bank public,
Yes.
influencing the process through our decisions about how we hold and use our money.
That's a great summary.
Wow.
It's a complex system
Yeah.
with lots of moving parts. And we haven't even touched on things like, the money multiplier formula or the portfolio approach to understanding money supply.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah,
My brain needs a moment to process all this.
it is a lot.
This deep dive is already living up to its name.
We've just scratched the surface, but I think we've laid a good foundation.
All right.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how all of this affects you directly.
Mm-hmm.
Your personal finances, your investments, even your daily spending decisions.
Now, that's what I'm really interested in. Can't wait to unpack those connections.
We'll get into all of that next time.
All right, stay tuned. All right, so we've covered like the basics of money supply,
Yeah.
the players, the process, the different types of money.
Right.
But now I'm really curious to like understand how it all affects me personally.
That's a great point. Knowing how the system works is one thing,
Right.
but understanding how it impacts your daily life is where it gets really interesting.
Exactly.
So let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about some of the real-world implications of money supply,
Okay.
especially when it comes to, your personal finances.
Perfect. Let's dive in. What's the most direct way this whole money supply thing affects me?
Well, think back to our earlier example of the economy as a swimming tool.
Okay.
If the central bank pumps too much
Yeah.
money into the pool,
Yeah.
what happens?
It overflows.
It overflows, right?
Yeah.
And in the economy, that overflow often shows up as inflation.
Ah, inflation.
Yeah,
That makes sense. More money chasing the same amount of goods and services
Exactly.
drives prices up.
precisely. You mentioned a story about inflation in Argentina earlier.
I did, yeah.
Countries struggling with runaway inflation are often dealing with the consequences of an overheated money supply.
So knowing about money supply can help me understand why, like, that avocado toast keeps getting pricier.
Exactly. It gives you a framework for analyzing those everyday price changes.
Okay.
Let's say you hear on the news that the central bank is planning to increase the money supply significantly.
Yeah.
Knowing what we know now, you might anticipate that inflation could pick up
Right.
and make decisions accordingly.
Like maybe stock up on some non-perishable items before prices go up.
That's one strategy.
Mm.
Or you might consider investing in assets that tend to perform well during inflationary periods,
Okay.
like real estate or commodities. The key is to be aware of the potential impact of money supply changes.
Right.
And think about how you can position yourself accordingly.
Yeah. I'm starting to see how understanding this stuff can make me like a savvier consumer
Yes.
an investor. It's not just about letting the economy like happen to me.
Right.
I can actually make smarter choices based on what I know.
Exactly. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that the relationship between money supply and inflation isn't always straightforward.
Right.
There are a lot of other factors at play.
Sure.
And sometimes a controlled increase in the money supply can actually be a good thing for the economy.
So it's not always a bad thing when the pool gets a bit more water.
Right. sometimes a little extra water can help stimulate economic growth,
Okay.
encourage businesses to invest, and even lead to job creation.
Okay.
Central banks are constantly trying to strike that delicate balance,
Right.
keeping inflation in check while also fostering a healthy economy.
Sounds like a tough job. So how does all this affect things like interest rates? Are they connected to money supply too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Remember how we talked about commercial banks lending out a portion of their deposits?
Yeah.
Well, the interest rates they charge on those loans are influenced by the overall availability of money in the system.
Okay.
When the money supply is high, there's more money available to lend.
Right.
And this competition among lenders can drive interest rates down.
Okay, so if I'm thinking about like buying a house or a car,
Uh-huh.
it might be advantageous to do so when the money supply is relatively high because interest rates on loans might be lower.
That's a great observation.
Mm.
Of course, there are a lot of other factors
Right.
that go into determining interest rates,
Sure.
but money supply definitely plays a role.
Okay.
Knowing how to read those signals can help you make more informed decisions about when to borrow or even when to lend.
This is making me think about money in like a whole new way.
Oh.
It's not just about spending and saving, it's about understanding the forces
Right,
that are shaping like the entire financial landscape.
exactly.
Yeah.
And once you understand those forces, you can start to use them to your advantage.
Okay.
Now let's talk about investing.
Okay.
Have you ever wondered how money supply might impact your investments?
Now that you mention it, I know the stock market can be volatile.
Yeah.
But are there any connections to money supply that I should be aware of?
Absolutely. Remember how we talked about the multiplier effect?
Yes.
And how an increase in high-powered money can lead to a much larger increase in the overall money supply.
Uh-huh.
Well, some of that extra money sloshing around in the system
Right.
often finds its way into the stock market.
So more money chasing stocks means higher stock prices.
It's a bit more nuanced than that,
Okay.
but you're on the right track.
Okay.
A rapid increase in the money supply can create what's called a liquidity effect in the market.
Okay.
This means there's more readily available cash to invest.
Right.
And some of that cash inevitably flows into stocks, potentially pushing prices up.
Ah, so that's why people talk about easy money policies boosting the stock market.
Exactly. But there's always a flip side.
Yes.
Remember our overflowing pool analogy?
Yeah.
If the money supply expands too quickly,
Right.
it can lead to inflation.
Uh-huh.
And inflation can erode the value of your investments,
Okay.
even if their prices are going up in nominal terms.
So it's a balancing act like everything else with money supply.
You got it.
Yeah.
Understanding these dynamics can help you make more informed decisions about your investment strategy.
Okay.
You might adjust your portfolio
Mhm, you're right.
based on your expectations about future inflation or interest rate changes,
Right.
all of which are influenced by the money supply.
This is really making me realize that money supply is like this hidden force behind so much of what happens in the economy
It really is.
and in my own financial life.
Absolutely. And the
Yeah.
more you understand these forces, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the complex world of finance.
Right.
Whether you're buying groceries, making investment decisions, or simply reading the financial news,
Yeah.
this knowledge gives you a powerful lens through which to understand the world around you.
Yeah. I'm definitely feeling a lot more empowered already. But I also know that like learning about money can be a bit like peeling an onion.
Yeah,
There's always another layer to uncover.
you're absolutely right. There's always more to learn. And in the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we'll explore some real-world examples of how money supply dynamics have played out throughout history,
Okay.
both the good and the bad.
Right.
These stories will help solidify your understanding and give you a deeper appreciation for the power of money.
Okay. Can't wait for that. Stay tuned. All right. I'm ready for those real world examples you promised. I want to see how this whole money supply thing has played out in history. You know, the good, the bad, and maybe even the ugly.
Well, get ready for some fascinating economic history lessons because money supply dynamics have definitely shaped some major events. One of the most dramatic examples is the Great Depression in the 1930s.
Ah, the Great Depression.
Yeah.
We learned about that in school, but I don't really remember money supply being like a big part of the story.
It's often overlooked. But a significant contraction of the money supply was a major contributing factor to the severity of the Depression. Remember our swimming pool analogy?
Yeah.
Well, imagine someone pulling the plug and draining a huge amount of water out of the pool. That's kind of what happened to the U.S. economy in the early 1930s.
So instead of too much money causing inflation, there was suddenly too little money in circulation.
Exactly. A series of bank failures led to a loss of confidence in the financial system. People panicked and started withdrawing their deposits, which further reduced the bank's ability to lend. The money multiplier went into reverse, and the money supply shrank dramatically.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster. What were the consequences of this, like, shrinking money supply?
Well, when there's less money circulating, people have less to spend. Businesses struggle to make profits, and overall economic activity slows down. This can lead to deflation, falling prices, which might sound good at first, but it can actually be just as damaging as runaway inflation.
Why is that? Wouldn't lower prices be a good thing for consumers?
In some cases, yes. But widespread deflation can create a vicious cycle. When prices are falling, people tend to postpone purchases, expecting prices to drop even further. This decreased demand leads to more business closures, job losses, and a further contraction of the economy. It becomes a downward spiral.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a healthy economy needs a stable money supply, not too much, not too little, to keep things running smoothly.
Exactly. It's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You want the money supply to be just right to support economic growth without triggering inflation or deflation. And the Great Depression is a stark reminder of what can happen when the balance gets thrown off.
Okay, so that's an example of what can go wrong. Are there any historical examples where increasing the money supply had a positive impact?
Definitely. The period of economic growth following World War II is often attributed in part to expansionary monetary policies. After the war, governments and central banks intentionally increased the money supply to stimulate economic activity and help rebuild war-torn economies.
So they basically gave the economy a much-needed cash infusion to kickstart growth.
Precisely. By making more money available for lending and investment, they helped fuel a period of unprecedented prosperity. Of course, there were many other factors at play as well, such as technological advancements and pent-up consumer demand. But the role of monetary policy in supporting this growth was significant.
Yeah, these examples are really bringing the theory to life for me. It's amazing to see how these money supply dynamics have played out in such pivotal moments in history.
And those lessons from the past can inform our understanding of current events. For example, the unprecedented actions taken by central banks during the recent global financial crisis, like quantitative easing, were all about trying to manage the money supply to prevent another Great Depression-style collapse.
Right, I remember hearing about those massive injections of money into the economy. It seemed pretty radical at the time.
It was a bold move,
Yeah.
but it highlights just how crucial understanding money supply is for policymakers. They're always walking a tightrope, trying to find that sweet spot between controlling inflation and promoting economic growth. It's a constant balancing act.
Yeah, no kidding. So, what does all this mean for me going forward? How can I use this newfound knowledge to navigate my own financial decisions?
The key takeaway is that you're now equipped with a valuable framework for understanding the financial world around you. When you hear about changes in interest rates, inflation trends, or central bank policies, you can start to connect the dots and anticipate potential consequences.
Right. Instead of just feeling overwhelmed by all the financial news, I can actually start to make sense of it and maybe even use it to my advantage.
Exactly. You might adjust your spending habits, reconsider a major purchase, or make more informed decisions about your investments. The knowledge you've gained about money supply gives you a real edge.
I'm definitely feeling a lot more confident about navigating the financial world. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. Thank you.
I'm so glad to hear that. Remember, learning about money is a lifelong journey. There's always more to explore and understand. But you've built a solid foundation, and I'm confident you'll continue to make smart financial choices.
Well, I'm excited to keep learning. And to our listeners, if this deep dive has piqued your interest, don't stop here. Keep researching, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep connecting the dots between money supply and your own financial life.
Well said. Until next time, keep diving deep.